Hi class, here is a sample, a sample of what we're going to call a thesis outline. And the reason why it's called a thesis outline is because on top, usually on top, you just kind of state your working thesis and then you list your points that you're going to cover. I added a few more things and I'm going to explain that for you right now. So what I went ahead and did is put my claim here, right? That's step one of this paper. You have to choose one of those claims from the prompt. And I chose, we prematurely write people off as failures. And what I added here are some questions, right? Questions that I came up with that I feel I have to answer in this paper. And two questions were, how does the U.S. prematurely write off people as failures in the public education system, right? Because I figured my reader would want, right? This is something that that I'm going to have to explain to my reader. And the second one is, why is it a bad thing? Right? So it's kind of a two-parter. So the first part of my paper, I feel like I have to inform my reader. The second part, I have to explain why it's bad. Some key terms that I felt I would want to discuss. And again, you don't have to discuss all of them. Just feel, you just want to talk about the ones that are going to pertain to your particular paper. Mine would be the Matthew effect and the cumulative advantage, opportunity, and relative age. Okay, and my working thesis, it's called a working thesis because it's meant to be revised. It's not going to be your thesis and on the actual draft. It may be, but it doesn't have to be. And my working thesis is, and you want to make sure you have some part of that claim. The United States prematurely writes people off as failures, and this is particularly evident in the public education system. Now, I deliberately chose to be really specific here because there were some examples from the Zoom sessions that kind of were more broad. All right. Anyway, so that's my working thesis. So my first point would kind of go with the how, right? How does the U.S. prematurely write off people as failures? And remember, I'm focusing on the public education system. So my first point in this first paragraph or two, right? Just because it's a point doesn't mean it's a single paragraph, but this one's probably going to be a single paragraph. Is I'm going to talk about testing, right, to identify gifted students. Now, a personal example, right, that I know about is the GATE testing in California, and Gladwell talks about the TIMSS test, right, the math and science. Talk about that, and then I might throw in a key term and talk about how this is going to provide these students with an opportunity. So once I've explained kind of what's going on, right, given my reader the background information they need, then I'm gonna focus on the why part, right? Why it's a bad thing. And my point number two, I think I can talk about relative age and bring that in and make the connection to the first point, right? Gladwell has a pretty good quote that I liked from the chapter, and we're talking about chapter 1, by the way. A confusing maturity with ability, and I think that's important, right? That's going to tie into the relative age that these students who are scoring higher are doing so not because they have more ability, but because they are more mature, right? And with that maturity comes the ability. So in effect, right, this kind of relates to that, to bring in another key term, the arbitrary advantage. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that, and then Gladwell brings up that Denmark waits a little bit later to group their students. So I might want to talk about that. And then I'll talk about how Gladwell explains that the older students score better, right? And that'll kind of tie back into the maturity. And it's going to create some advantages, and I can throw in the term of the Matthew effect. All right, and then I move on to my next point again. Why? Why is this a bad thing, right? We're going back to that question. Well, this came up in our discussion when we had the Zoom session that it could create some psychological advantages. There could be a long-term effect, and I'm going to add this. I thought I added this here, but I don't see it now. But now that I'm here, Gladwell talks about that the number of people who commit suicide are born later in the year, right? And since we're talking about relative age, I might talk about that. And then another thing that came up in our discussion was the student fear factor. How that these advantages or this psychological effect from these students, right, who may feel unworthy, right, because they didn't score high on this test a long time ago, it kind of stays with them, right? And it stays with them to college, and the statistics actually prove that, right? I think of the student body, there's less students who are born in the second half of the year than the first. Okay, so I can make that connection. Now, I added this. So here, right, because we have to have at least one article from the databases, and we talked about search terms in the Zoom session. So here are some that I could consider, right? I could look up relative age and academic success, and I already did, and there's some information. I could focus on the Denmark, right? I can do some research on the Denmark, and then I can find an article and make that part of point 2. Relative age and suicide attempt, right? I just added that there. That's on page 29 in the Gladwell. And relative age and college admission, right? So all I would want to do is find something, right? Something from the outside sources that's going to help prove my points. So that's basically all I want you to do, right? Just to kind of start getting your ideas mapped out so you can see your paper kind of unfold right in front of your eyes.